My name is Mike DeLier. I started at KWTV about 1972, I think in January of 1972, and I was there for 10 years as the National Sales Manager, General Sales Manager, and Station Manager. I graduated from the University of Oklahoma, was in the United States Marine Corps for a couple of years, and my first job was as a television rep with the Edward Petrie Company in Chicago. I was with Petrie for probably 10 months and was offered a wonderful job with John Blair Company, a competitor of Petrie's. I was on what they call the major market list of Blair. We had 23 stations in the top 25 markets, beginning in New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, on and on. We had all the Cap City stations, which then became the ABC owned and operated stations. How I actually came to go to work for KWTV, it was, I think, during the time of an NAB or some kind of a meeting or whatever in Chicago, and my dad was there and John Griffin was there. And we were sitting in a suite, I remember that, and there were a bunch of people there, and someone called out, does anybody know the phone number for Footcone? Footcone and Bellings, an advertising agency. And I said 467-9200. And Mr. Griffin said, well, you can tell there's somebody calling Footcone often to remember the phone number. Later that day, or maybe at dinner, I told him I had talked to WDSU in New Orleans, the NBC affiliate, about going to work for them as a national sales manager, and also KCMO in Kansas City, the CBS affiliate. It was owned by Meredith Corporation at the time. And he said, why don't you talk to your dad about coming to KWTV in Oklahoma City as a national sales manager? And I did, and I can't remember how everything played itself out, but in January, I believe in 1972, I did. And I know when I came to work there, the major emphasis, as it is on so many stations, but in particular KWTV at that time, was on news. And the station had maybe in the previous year, gone to an hour newscast, which was certainly the first hour newscast in Oklahoma City. Before that, there was the news guy, there was the weather guy, and there was the sports guy on every station around the country. And I will give my dad total credit for that. That was really his genius to expand the newscast, the news efforts, the detractors, which included some of those at the station, some of the key management at the station, had suspicions of whether it would, or doubts, I guess, whether it would ever work. The first few rating books, first few years, it wasn't, the ratings weren't what everybody had hoped for. But I learned something from my father, and I learned something about management from my father, and that was to stay the course. And if you're right and you've got an idea, you make changes along the way, but you stay with the thought process and with your expectations. The doubts crept in through news personnel we had, weather personnel we had, reporters that we had. After I joined the station, I remember very well, we had exodus of quite a few news personnel because they thought that they had integrity and no one else did or something. I never could quite understand what they were talking about, but it all had to do with, there was a Pontiac company here called Coker Pontiac, and they ran a story, our news department ran a story about the new car dealers, or all car dealers, putting surcharges on customers' bills, and that paid for people leaving mechanic rags and trunks and lost tools and that type thing. Joe Coker called me up, and he was the president, I think, of the New Car Association, and he said, gosh, all we want to do is just we understand this report's going to be made on the news, and all we want to do is have our time in court, or nobody interviewed us. And I took it to my dad, and I didn't have anything to do with running the news department at that time. It was solely under his purview, and he said, gosh, they're right. They should have something to say about it. and told our news director to go out and interview Joe Coker or anybody else as part of the story, which would have really made a better story about it. There was a guy named Tracy Rowlett in particular who was a assignment reporter, I think, who kind of organized some of the reporters, and they quit and went to the press, and it kind of blew up to the point where it made the front page of the Wall Street Journal. The truth of the matter is we really got rid of a lot of dead weight. It seemed to me at that time as kind of a young guy just looking at the newscasts, and this was something that stuck with me until this day. In companies, certainly in TV stations, many times people fall into two categories, contributors or prohibitors. The people that are the middle-of-the-road people are many times prohibitors also because they're not doing anything productive. The contributors want to contribute. They have self-esteem. They want to do well. They want to see the station succeed. They want to see themselves succeed. Call it ambition, call it value systems, whatever, I don't know. But Dad then hired a news director. I guess maybe he was already there by that time, Ed Turner. And Ed, to this day, I think, was certainly the finest television journalist in the history of television newscasts. And that includes any news director or director of any network newscast. Matter of fact, Ed became one of the founders of CNN. After he left us, he went to Washington, D.C., and many of the creative elements in every newscast all across the nation originated with Ed Turner. And they did, and they originated at KWTV in Oklahoma City. And all these things made a huge impression upon me as a young guy. I was 24 years old, 25, something like that. And I could see what was going on. I knew enough about what I was doing of selling the whole station, and I knew enough what my father was trying to do as the general manager and the president of the company, and I knew enough about what Ed Turner was trying to develop as far as the newscast, and I could see what was happening on the air, those that followed it, the game plan, those that didn't. And I knew enough about the ratings, I could read the ratings, to put all of this together. And certain things made sense to me, whereas they didn't maybe to everybody that was just concerned solely with doing their job, whether it be on air or just selling it or whatnot. And I've taken these things with me for every station that I've ever managed or group of stations that I've ever managed. And I think that there were consistencies of leadership that I found at that station through my dad, and I'm bragging on him, but that's where I learned how to manage a television station. One of the first things I learned as a national sales manager, I wrote a letter to someone. We all had assistants in those days, and copied my dad as the general manager. And his copy came back to me later that afternoon, marked in red, either misspelled words, improper syntax, punctuation errors, or whatnot. And I took it to him and said, "What's this?" And he said, "Well, look at all these errors. I mean, this thing's going out under your name." And I said, "Well, I didn't type it. My assistant did." And he said, "It's got your name on it, doesn't it?" Never forgot that. Did not review any letter that was ever typed up. I've never not reviewed any letter or email that I've ever written many times over because of that. Going back to news and weather, we had, I believe, David Grant. David Guile was our chief meteorologist when I joined the station. It was very good. And WKY had a news image. They had a weather image. They were owned by the Daily Oklahoman. They had the number one AM FM radio station in town, the number one FM radio station in town, and the newspaper. And they certainly gave good coverage, cross-promoted all three entities, and did it very well. I was all for buying a radio station in town to use that kind of cross-promotion, and eventually did that in some markets. But I could see the efficacy of promotion, and it made sense to me. Well, we hired Gary England to come in and replace David Guile. I believe that is. I'm a little unsure of the dates and times on that. And Gary did a great job. It seemed like he had been working for the National Hurricane Weather Service in New Orleans and then KOMA Radio. And a lot of energy on the air. We had a couple other new weather people also that had good energy on the air, but we weren't getting any traction in the ratings. And didn't know why and whatnot. We were beginning to buy equipment. We knew at that stage of the game that we had the best weather equipment in the marketplace. There's no question about that. We were the first one not only to have the Doppler radar, we were the first one in the market, I think in the United States, to use radar. We had satellite pictures, satellite enhancements, and I know we were the first television station in the United States to use satellite enhancements. We finally figured out a promotional slug line, and it was very simple, and it was this: is during severe weather, can you dare not watch KWTV? And that was it, plain and simple. And we hit that, and we pounded it, and we pounded it more and harder, and you could see as that developed, the image of the station developed, coupled with good on-air presence, and we developed into a very good newscast and a continuity of newscasts from the morning, noon, and our 6 and 10, which was an hour at 6 o'clock. Many people felt like you couldn't fill an hour news in Oklahoma City, but we did. Learned a lot of good production techniques from Ed Turner. It's really kind of interesting. I was watching our noon news one time. There was a snowstorm on Lincoln Boulevard, and it was a live shot, and you could see the reporter talking about it, and then the weather, and then he said, and now we'll switch over to another reporter talking about it. And I said, my God, we got two reporters up on Lincoln Boulevard in front of the Capitol. You know, how do we do that? And I didn't know we had those kind of resources. And what Ed did is he just turned the camera around and shot one shot to the north and another one, another reporter to the south. And it was those kind of production techniques and expediting usage and technology and whatnot. Certainly minicams were coming into vogue then, helicopters were, and I think that of all the TV stations that I was aware of in the United States, and having been with Petrie and Blair, probably repped 50 some odd as a salesman, large markets, I think that the resources that KWTV exhibited at that time were unheard of and extraordinary. WKY at that time had a local sales manager by the name of Hudson Schubert. He was a decent enough guy, I guess, at a American Women in Radio Television Christmas party. The top time buyer in the market was a wonderful lady by the name of Patty Mize, who worked for Low Runkle. And we're standing there having a drink, and Schubert, we were talking about our news and the growth of it, and Schubert came up and said WKY could put a monkey on their news and beat us. I'll never forget that. I've told this story to a lot of people over the years. About a year later, when we became number one, and I'll try to clean this up as best I can, my assistant was a lady by the name of Betty Ferguson. And we went down to TG&Y and bought a little monkey that had cymbals. It clapped like that, and head spun around, and put it in a FedEx box and shipped it to him overnight and said, here, put this son of a gun on the air and see if it helps you. The people over there found that pretty funny. And I'm talking about Tom Parrington and Norman Bagwell, who's the general manager, and Nick Panos, who was a national sales manager. And we got along well with them. And at that time, much more so then than now, you had rate integrity. And you really worked off of your published rate cards, and were in a position, morally, ethically, business-wise, and everything else, where you understood your competitors and respected them, and knew that the agencies, they might try to josh you a little bit or handle you a little bit, but you maintain your rate integrity. And nobody really talked and coerced each other or anything like that, but it was much different than the rate cutting and that goes on now, and including that with the networks. Another kind of a funny story, I think, along those lines. Nick Panis was Greek, and I had a very good friend of mine with DeLier in Chicago by the name of Gus Theodore, who was also Greek. And for 2 or 3 years, I'd write Panis little notes, and he'd send them back to me in Greek, and I had Gus Theodore interpret his notes and write notes back to Gus in Greek, and he thought for years that I knew and understood Greek, which I didn't know anything. One of the other things that I really learned at KWTV, and I currently have a consulting company and had one for 6, 7 years, I guess, 8 years, and have utilized that to a lot of success, was simply this. And most TV stations I find have got everything backwards because of consultant speak and consultant teaching, and it's just one simple thing. You have heard for years that the way to gain respect and ratings in a marketplace is to get yourself involved with the community. And that's a wonderful thing and a necessary thing. The real true way to do it, which exceeds all other ways by far, is to get the community involved with you and as a viewer. And as a viewer that wants to watch your station, and as a viewer that wants to watch your station in particular, and as they fill out diaries, whatever the rating method is, then they know and respect your call letters and find you as part of their daily needs. And how we did it is this. We signed with several ways. One, we signed an all-sports agreement, and people don't know this anymore, with the University of Oklahoma. We, in effect, had the first Texas Longhorn Network. It was an all-sports agreement with the University of Oklahoma exclusive of football. The ABC had a contract with the NCAA for football, so we couldn't have that. We had it with every other sport, male, female, basketball, wrestling, you name it. We had an exclusive 5-year contract with the University of Oklahoma. Bill Banowski was the president at that time, with an automatic 5-year renewal, unless we decided that we didn't want to do it. How anybody ever lost that, I don't know. But that the value to KWTV would have been unbelievable on that, because ABC or CBS or Fox or whoever would have had to buy KWTV out of that contract. One of the other things we did is this. We started a KWTV tennis tournament and got it sanctioned through the state tennis federation in Oklahoma. We went out through CBS. The play-by-play and the color announcer were Tony Trabert and that wasn't Pat Summerall, it was Tom Brookshire. And we had them for 2 or 3 years set up at the courts in Oklahoma City, and it was a state-sanctioned tournament. Some of the best tennis players in Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Kansas, Missouri came to that event, and CBS actually aired it on the network as well. And I don't know how that left KWTV, because that was not only a good moneymaker for us, it was a pretty interesting concept. We also had the National Finals Rodeo was originated in Oklahoma City. We got the contract on that. And I believe we had that sold. I know we had it sold to Skoll and Ford Motor Company, and I believe we had it syndicated in like 110 or 115 markets around the United States. And we syndicated that ourselves and reaped the profits of it and fed that to these stations. And again, that was a pretty good moneymaker for us, and all that gave us identity that the other stations didn't have. They were taking network sports, they were taking really not any local originations to that on a scale like that. And they were hard to do, they were arduous to do, they were time consuming, and cost a lot of money to do, but we made a lot of money with it also. And speaking about some of the good people out there, one in particular comes to mind because I worked with him so much, is Rob Cryer, who's the current general manager. Robbie started at KWTV as a local salesman, and his wife and I were from the same town, his wife and my wife were from the same town, called Wacomas, Oklahoma. Robbie started in right off the bat, did a heck of a good job as a local salesman. And pretty soon promoted him to the national sales manager position, and he did a great job. Robbie was willing to travel often. Not only when he traveled, he made calls, and good calls, had something to say, and was just a real credit to the station. In thinking about local sales, a quick story does come to mind, and I was directly responsible for getting Brahms on television. Their headquarters were located pretty close to KWTV, and literally I went out to see Mr. Brahms every morning for, it seems like months. It was probably 2 months, but it seemed like it was 6 months. He had a manager, and I met with both. I think his last name was Tyler, and I met with both of them, and they were solely newspaper advertisers. And I pitched television and pitched television and pitched television. They finally one day, they surprised the heck out of me, and they said, okay, we're ready to do something. We want to do something in Oklahoma City and Tulsa and get something together for us. And I called our sister station, KTUL in Tulsa, had them send me some rates and programs and put together a schedule, and I got a budget from them. The problem was, it was like the first week in February. And they wanted to run a comparative between newspaper, their sales, and television. And when television was on, it was 31 degrees and the wind out of the north at 40 miles an hour. The next week, when newspapers were on, it was unseasonably warm at 65 or 70. When television was on, I was running all over Oklahoma City, ordering banana splits and telling the store manager that I'd seen it on KWTV. But lo and behold, their sales were hugely better on television than they were on newspaper, and they decided that they'd put a lot of their budget into television, and they did. And pretty soon their sales fell off, and they couldn't understand why. And they thought about it, and they were asking us, and nobody could understand it. We were over for a production shoot one day, and I always made a point on going on the production shoot because I cared about the account and we wanted to put our best foot forward. Jerry Dalrymple was our head of production. Jerry's a tough guy and a good guy. And we got through with the shoot, and Mr. Brahm was over there, and we were still talking about their sales or whatnot, and he said, "Is anybody hungry?" And Jerry said, "Yeah, I am. Can we get a hamburger for the crew and whatnot?" And they fixed hamburgers for everybody, and they're great hamburgers. And Mr. Baum said, "Anybody want any ice cream or whatnot?" And Jerry said, "Yeah, give me a vanilla cone or whatever." And he did, and Gary ate it and went, "Oh my God, this is terrible. What happened?" And what exactly had happened is where they were cooking hamburgers was very close to the bin where they had the ice cream. And right across the little kitchen they had in the Brahms, and the grease from the hamburgers was floating up in the air and settling on the ice cream when the top of the ice cream bin was open. And that was the cause of the loss of business they had. And as soon as Brahms corrected that through ventilation and moving the ice cream away from the the stoves, their sales went up immediately. And that's, Jerry, that was all attributable to the intuition and the knowledge and the eating ability of one Jerry Dalrymple. Jerry also got mad at a guy one time, and we put Studio B in there and Control Room B, and an audio guy, and he kept screwing up a commercial, and you couldn't do these in these day and time. Jerry went in, grabbed the guy out of the booth, and threw him down about 3 steps and fired him. and just for not being engaged and not doing his job very well. And those were kind of funny things and things you could do rightly or wrongly in today's society, but they were done, and people didn't put up with a lot of nonsense. There was horseplay, and it was fun as long as you got the job done and as long as you did the job well. And Jerry led that production department, and they were well disciplined, and they did care about what they were doing, and they cared about doing it well. We had art department at that time, a couple of art directors, and I can remember once on a news story that they had done artwork showing a courtroom and the judge and one of the witnesses or something, and Jerry thought it was bad artwork or tawdry, and after the first shot of it, the newscast went in and tore it up and told them they had 10 minutes to sit there and either do a better job with it or their artwork wasn't going to appear on the news. And they hustled up and did a better job. And Jerry looked at high quality, professional quality work at all times, and he did. And Jerry was a real contributor to the success of that station. Jerry, all the directors worked under Jerry. He was a tough taskmaster, and I can't say all of them were happy with him all the time. Probably weren't. But they learned, and I think as they had new people coming in and trained him, they trained them the same way Jerry trained them. I first went to work at the station as I was 14 years old one summer as a cameraman. The head of the directors was a guy by the name of Pat Moran. And we drilled with the cameras. And you learned to dolly left and right and pan left and right and truck left and right and back and forward. You learned how to rack lenses and zoom in. The zoom was right in front of the lens, and you actually put your hand in reverse to rack a lens. And the zoom, you could tighten it up or zoom in or out. And if you messed up on air, they pulled you. They had cameramen in reserves and people that were looking for jobs and that wanted jobs. And it was a status symbol to get to run #1 camera. I never made it. As high as I ever got was #2. And the guy that had #1, I can't remember his name, but he shot better than everybody. And he developed shots to the point, and I learned this about directing, is have your camera people look for shots and just not keep it stationary, but look for shots. And hear the director say, good shot, #1, we're coming to you. Good shot, #2, we're coming to you. Same thing with audio. Same thing with testing mics. Same thing with lighting. One of the first jobs I had was lighting. And if you're in shadows or the lighting is not correct, or if you don't have a plan for height of anchors and height of chairs on the set, you get bad camera lighting, you get bad angles, and you learn to shoot down on people. And to this day, I look at a newscast and the shots are wrong. And it's because nobody's taken the time to mark the camera angles and those kind of things. And I learned all of those from good instructors as a kid. And there was a lot of horseplay and a lot of banter and a lot of fun stuff, but when it came time to work, people worked. And everything was live, and you couldn't go back and redo it. Once it happened forever that way. Well, that's about pretty much what I have, but I'd like to take this opportunity to say a couple things for the record. First and foremost, I would like to thank my father, Jack DeLier, for hiring me and for training me. It was absolutely the greatest training any young man could ever have, not only in the television business, but in business in general. He was detail-oriented, he was fair, he was honest, and very, very ethical. And no matter what the problem, no matter what the situation, those traits ruled the day, and those traits, all decisions were based off of that. And not only did I respect him as my father, I respected him as my boss. And that was just very, very important. And if whatever success I have had in television or in business, I always hearken back, or I always think back situationally to those. I can't help but think it in how I was trained and how I learned to think, and the mentoring I had about doing everything honestly. And I'd like to thank all the good people that helped me, and there were tons of them. And I thank you and wish everybody well, and I hope this was somewhat entertaining or interesting. So thank you very much.